Today we are building a capital city, and not just any capital city, but the largest city in my world, Maladea. And we're going to be doing it step by step inside of World Anvil, our sponsor today, and hopefully through my process, it can help you work through your own. Now, this is just what works for me. Some people might do it differently, and others might do it better or faster, and I highly recommend that you search out other people as well as part of your creative process so that you can truly figure out what method works for you and you're not just getting information from one single burning flame in the realm eternal. The questions that I ask myself, among many, but the main questions that I ask myself when I am creating a city, and really when I'm doing sort of any world building: why was this city placed where it is? What is the purpose of this city? Answering this question is going to determine not only the history of the city, but also its economy. So was it built for trade? Was it a place that exiles were sent to long ago, a la, Australia? Was it built as a strategic point on the map to maintain military control? There's always a purpose. There's always a reason. Obviously, the little caveat is that in a modernized world like what we have today, in a world that is very fully globalized in the way that it is today, you're not going to have that need because, nowadays we have sprawling suburbs that go on for, dozens of miles. So like that need to be near a strategic location is no longer as relevant as it used to be, but the city's origins do start in a purpose or in a reason. So in the case of my city, Cantos, it was a fishing village that, due to its position on the river, it boomed and became a place for merchants to stop and trade, and more people sort of started to go there and eventually started opening up their own shops and became a bustling trade hub and boomed into a city. So the next thing I want to ask after I know what the city is doing there is I want to ask how does it defend itself, right? Otherwise it wouldn't stick around for very long. So does it have castles? Does it have keeps? Are there towers, ballistas, cannons? What does the guard look like? And I mean, I'm not talking about what does the average person look like that serves in the guard. I mean, what is the makeup of the guard? Do they have their own weapons? Do they have their own armor that's supplied by the city? Or is this something that they have to provide for themselves because it's a volunteer unit and not paid for? So small towns or villages, for example, may not have any guard at all because they just don't have the means to keep a guard on staff. And so you end up having more of like a neighborhood watch than anything else. Larger towns might have volunteer guard, and since they may not have a lot of money, they might rotate the same set of armor and weapons between lots and lots of people, or they have older equipment in general from like maybe 100 years ago or whatever, right? They may also not meet very often for training, if ever. So what this means is that they might be good at handling small problems, but they are not very good at large scale combat with trained enemies. So you might be able to defend against a local drunk or somebody who comes into town to cause some trouble, but they're not going to have a very good time at like defending against a horde of goblins, for example. So Cantos, the city that we are building in my world, is the largest city in Maladea, right? It is the New York of the world, to give it sort of a more comparable status for you guys who don't really know much about my world at this point. But it is a very wealthy city. It is a very wealthy city at the height of its power, and it has city guard that trains regularly and is on payroll. So they're not volunteer, which means that they have good armor that is fitted to them. They hire people specifically to keep the city safe. In a lot of ways, it's almost like a standing army. So beyond that, they also have a standing army that serves the city of Cantos, and they're garrisoned in local forts and that sort of thing, but there is also a garrison within the city itself. So you have the local city guard, and then you have the standing army as well that sort of is rotated through various forts and strategic positions throughout the country. Cantos is the capital of the country of Alara, right? And it is a country at war with its neighbors, so it's going to have areas of the city that are meant for military and wartime use. So once we know that, then the next sort of set of questions that we need to know is who rules the local area and the greater area. And remember, all of this is still kind of considered within that number one step, if you will, right? I'm still just trying to get a basic understanding of the city. So who rules it? What are the walls and boundaries of the city, and what are the access points, right? The gates, the roads in and out, what is all of that? And then finally, once we know all of that information, what the city's purpose is, what its economy is, all of that good stuff, then we can sort of start to understand what the landmarks and infrastructure within the city are. So now, Cantos is currently ruled by Emperor Ulrich Rolf, right? That's just something I know about my world. It's not something you need to know. But Ulrich Rolf commands an area made up of about 7 kingdoms, depending on the day of the week, right? There's always sort of open rebellion and that sort of thing. But there's also a few up-and-coming city-states in the country that may become cities themselves, might become their own regions. And then there's also colonial territories hundreds of miles away. So I have all of that background info so I can start to piece things together from there. So what works best for me is to start from the outside and sort of work in. So as far as defenses and boundaries, the city is surrounded by this massive ancient wall. And the wall itself is dotted with like these old towers that are massive statues that are meant to depict the long dead rulers. The wall itself is about 50 feet high. The towers themselves are about 70 feet high. They're these massive statues. But because the city has been growing and the city itself is very, very old, right? A couple thousand years old, some of the towers have been destroyed in moments of civil unrest. There's been war, there's been attacks from beyond, etc. So some of the towers have seen better days. And in times of war, there wasn't much time to care much about what the towers looked like. So some of the towers were rebuilt as normal square towers very quickly. So what's interesting about my city, and I think something that makes it stand out, is that when you're looking out at the walls from outside the city and you're looking at the walls, there are these towers that start right there, again, these like 70-foot statues with legs that are in armor or they're in dresses or robes or what have you. And then some of them from like the waist upwards are just a square tower. So you have these people that stand there, you see legs, and then from the legs up is just a normal square tower. And so some of the towers are damaged in big ways. Some of them are only missing a limb or a nose like the Sphinx. But what's clear is that the city is very old and that the walls have seen some shit. And so due to its sort of Mediterranean and subtropical climate, the walls are also covered in these beautiful flowering ivy plants that sort of blanket the walls and hang from the statues and make for some really striking walls for travelers to see when they're coming into the city for most of the year. The walls themselves once served a greater purpose when war was at the gates, but they have since just become the boundary for the inner and outer city, or the inner district and outer district. Those that live inside the walls are going to be those merchants, your traders, your smiths, the wealthy nobles with a trade or a service. And then the commoners live towards the edge of the walls and outside the walls in various districts that sort of spread out for miles in either direction. Again, this is a very, very big city with close to 1 million people. A city from real life, whatever that is, that I found lots of inspiration in was the city of ancient Carthage. And something that I really liked about Carthage was that it had 2 harbors, and one harbor was dedicated for military ships and the other harbor was dedicated for trade. And because I am the master of this world, I decided I want Cantos to have that sort of same buildup. So I actually put in 3 harbors. I like the idea of having like 2 harbors for trade and 1 for military purposes. And then because it is the capital of the empire, it also needs a palace, right? And so like some sort of rich person's Alcatraz, I kind of wanted the palace to be seen by the entire city as like this like beacon of hope and power. So it's actually built on an island in the bay that people can see when they're inside the city. You can go to the docks, look out into the bay, and you see an island and a massive palace built there where the emperor or the empress can watch the ships and the city and the horizon from their beautiful gleaming towers. So I also know that due to the city's geography, the city is built on tiers in a lot of ways like San Francisco. So because of these hills that it's built on, it kind of has this up and down, but this sort of like gradual rise up. And so it rises gradually on these rolling hills that it's famous for. And so one of the districts is actually called the 10 Hills. And the city itself is actually pretty compact inside the walls, especially as it got older and older and room inside the walls became more precious, aka expensive. So there are suburbs that go beyond the city itself that spread out close to 10 square miles in every direction. So it's a very, very prosperous city. Now, obviously that's quite a long walk, right? It would take, an hour, maybe even more depending on the person. So rather than have to make that trek into the city, the system as a growing power of technology in a world that is losing magic, the city of Cantos has built their own transportation system with trolleys, again, kind of like San Francisco. And they have their own gondola system that takes you from one side of the city to the other. And it uses technology that was inspired by the ancient elves. So again, going back into my history, into my timelines, pulling on that to sort of inform future generations, right? So I'm going to go ahead and drop, we're looking at this map now. This is like rough example of what the city is. So I'm going to go ahead and drop a couple of stations throughout the city and on the main street. At least it'll cut out some of the daily walk for the average citizen. And of course, it costs some money to take these trolleys and these things. So it's not everybody can afford it, or, you can imagine that there are people that would rather save that money and just walk. But at least there is a transportation system that's available that helps, right? And not only that, but it also is something that helps the city itself stand out. So then after I have those locations, well, then I want to set up my main roads. And obviously I'm going to have stations on the main road, but every city has at least one spine that everything else kind of grows around, right? A road that used to go into the city, through the market district, and to the docks, right? And then streets kind of plopped up from there around it. So for Cantos, that's the market down to the docks, since that's where everything started. So from that main artery, cross streets sort of branch into other marketplaces, into other residential districts, and we can start to kind of taper those streets off into the suburbs. So just try to imagine that roads are sort of how your people move, obviously. So they're also how you shape the story. So every parade, every invasion, every trade caravan is going to follow these paths, and you can sort of tell a little bit of the world building through what's happening on these roads. So I actually like to put a lot of thought into what my roads look like, you know, whether they have pottery or they have greenery, whether it's cobblestone or dirt or whatever. That tells a lot about the city and tells you a lot about how much foot traffic it gets based on what it looks like. So you want to start to visualize that, right? And not only that, you also want to start to visualize the division of the city. Where are the various districts, right? You might have a district down the center in the market area. And then where do you see cross streets sort of gradually creating their own districts based on various things in the city, right? Start to kind of think about that as you're putting that down on paper. And I know that visualizing this part can actually be pretty daunting, and it's helpful to start labeling, to start brainstorming, to start writing things down. And if it matters to any of you, this program that I'm using, like I said, is World Anvil for all of this. Now that we've answered those foundational questions about why Cantos exists and who rules it, we need a place to actually organize all these moving parts and drawing the landmark. For you, it might be your notebook or a Google Doc. For me, what you're seeing here is World Anvil, the sponsor of today's video, and it is an absolute lifesaver for me. And when you're building a capital this big, you aren't just going to be drawing houses and like little squares and stuff. I mean, obviously that's what I did, but you're also trying to manage hundreds of years of history, and you're trying to remember specialized military garrisons and complex transportation systems. If your city is huge like mine and has all of these trolleys and gondola systems. But inside World Anvil, I can take all of these details, like the names of the 11 kingdoms or the specific stats for the city guard, and pin them directly onto my map. And it turns this, what would just be a static image, into this sort of interactive atlas that I think is really, really cool and is actually super helpful for my sort of scatterbrained brain. And if my players or my readers want to know why this specific tower is shaped the way that it is and why there's a square on top and like leg statues at the bottom, they can just click the pin and read the lore about it immediately. And so it kind of works like the spine of my entire world building, and it keeps everything organized where I can just funnel all of my information and find it all in one direct place. Now, if you want to check out World Anvil for yourself, you can go to worldanvil.com and use my coupon code FANTASYFORGE at checkout. It'll get you 51% off of any yearly membership to World Anvil. It's the best way to support the channel and level up your world building, so check the link in the description and go ahead and get started. So the very next thing we want to do is carve the city into districts, and it doesn't have to be very complicated. You just need to know where things are going to happen. So Cantos has its marketplace pressed up against the docks for easy trade. It has a noble quarter that's sitting higher on the hills where the view is best. That just makes sense, right? And then it has military compounds to the east, closer to the barracks and the training fields near the military wharf. So the point here isn't flavor yet, right? It's all logistics. Where do people work? Where do they live? Where do they pray? And where do they fight, right? Those are sort of the things that I'm thinking of. Then there's the infrastructure that keeps the whole machine running. So the granaries, the warehouses for food that are probably going to be along the docks to make it easy for people to load off and onto ships. Then there's, cisterns and aqueducts for water, and yes, a sewer system that may or may not double as a dungeon crawl later on. But Cantos has lots of stores within the palace, on the bay, as well as near the barracks. So those are going to be kept under lock and key. Local merchants are also going to have their own stores. And then the docks themselves are crowded with warehouses and large silos, like I said, that provide the food for much of the city. So I know where the stuff is coming from, how people are living, right? So I can start to kind of plot where all of that is. And then finally, we drop in the landmarks. So these are the anchor points that, at least I believe that these are the anchor points that are going to give the city its identity. So we have the Emperor's Palace that gleams in the bay, right? That's one thing. But inside the walls, Cantos also is well known for its university. It's something that I've brought up in a couple of the stories. Shout out to those of you who've watched The Pale Lands, right? So there's the university for studying the ancient world that Maladeans know very little about. There's also a square that has the statue of the founder of the city. Let me know in the comments if you know that guy's name, if you're a true fan of the channel. And then there's also a clock tower, which is a much more modern invention. And then the Halian Temple, which I can go into a lot about, but it's essentially a place to pray to any gods. And then there's the lighthouse in the harbor. Now, all of this might change. I might think of more things. I might remove some things, but when players are thinking of your city, they should picture these things first. It's sort of like a shorthand to make the city memorable, right? So after we have laid everything out, now we can start to think about flavor. This is really where the fun part begins for me, because now we're thinking about history. This is where we can start to name the buildings. We can start to name the streets, the districts, the neighborhoods, all of that good stuff, right? So let's go ahead and dive into the districts now. So for San Francisco, for example, the Mission District started as farmland and missions, hence the name. You can watch this video right here all about San Francisco. Francisco and everything it taught me about building a city from the ground up. But, you know, that's a whole other thing. All I really want to try and understand is like, how can a city become what it does today? And how can I transfer that to knowing that San Francisco's Mission District was started by a wave of immigrants, and today it's this hub for art and nightlife. You know, New York has Chinatown, which wasn't very planned as far as I know, and it kind of grew because immigrants clustered there, right? Wall Street is named literally after the wooden wall that once stood there. Thank you, National Treasure, for teaching me that. So when I'm building cantos, I want to ask myself, what's the story of each of these neighborhoods, right? Because that's what it comes down to. What happened not only in the city, but what happened in these districts? What events, what geography, what economy made them exist, right? We know that there are districts in San Francisco that were rebuilt because there was a fire. And so they change, right? So up in the center of my city, in the center of this city, overlooking the bay and the palace, a prime spot for its views, you have 10 Hills. And this district is the original fishing village. It's changed a lot, but the original cobblestone streets still stand there, right? That's kind of it. That's all I really need to know, because I don't have to dive too much into the history. I just need to know a basic understanding of why it's important today, right? It's the OG village. Then there's the Night District, and this one is really special to me. It's a very standout district, something that makes the city kind of unique, because these homes were built differently back in the day. This was a street that was once a place for elves in a time where they weren't welcome in the world, found a little corner of the city for their culture. And over time, they made a market that was open at night, since they don't sleep, and they didn't have to compete with the daytime markets. So elves set up after sundown, and they would create these little stalls that had these lanterns, and it became the place to eat and drink. And even though the elves are gone in the world, spoilers, that market and that tradition still stands, with many of the homes being carved, built, and painted differently, sort of in the styles of those elves. But it's this very flamboyant market area of the city that many would love to afford to be able to live there, and it sort of stems from having this other culture there, right? Then there's also a district called the Pitch near the docks, and it used to be the original shoreline where they would work on the ships. But over time, the city sort of changed in shape, and the shore changed, and land was added to create more working areas. So at first, it was all rope walks, it was carpenters, it was tar, hence the name The Pitch. But now it's this dense working class neighborhood for the middle class, kind of along the docks, right? And that gives you a decent idea of how I structure my neighborhoods. Now, obviously, I can't go into every single one in this video, or this video would be 100 hours long, but it does give you an idea for a few of them and how I structure. So then from there, you can start to hyper focus on imagining your world in action. So what do the different districts sound like? What do they smell like? A district near one of the gondolas or the train stations will be busy when the sun goes down as people come to and from work. So that'll, affect how people are experiencing their time there. The Pitch district is going to sound like bells and smell like the sea, versus the Night district that's going to smell like tea and cooking food or meat, right? The main gate, or what's called the mouth of the wolf, or the wolf gate, is the busiest in the mornings when people are trying to get into the city. So these are little descriptors that I like to write down so that I don't have to remember them next time. I literally just jot them in here, and I have everything in sort of one place for me. And then from there, you can layer more history, right? You can go crazy. So a district that looks half one way and half another is because there was a fire 100 years ago, right? And half of the homes had to be rebuilt. So you have a visual marker of history as well with things like that, with fires, earthquakes, that sort of thing. And you can have a whole district made up of people from around the world that didn't feel at home amongst the citizens of Cantos, the Alarans. So they formed little districts of their own that have survived all these years, where they can meet people from their own lands that speak their own language. And after all, this is a trade city, and a massive one at that, right? The largest in the world on Maladea. So you're going to get people from all over the world looking for work and opportunity. So it just makes sense that there would be districts for them to go to. So ultimately, how deep you want to go into your cities is completely up to you. You don't have to do it the way that I do. You can also go way more into it than I do. The point is that when you think about it, even a fraction as deep as this, you can start to create a history that informs your world building. So if this is for D&D, you can build encounter tables around each district. Landmarks can be places for where your characters meet. You can start to think about story hooks around infrastructure too. Like, what happens if the seawall breaks and the pitch gets flooded? What happens if the Night district becomes the target of an attack from people who want to see that elvish history erased, right? Or you can just think about that as like plot hooks and story hooks for a world that you're writing, or for a video game that you're working on, right? This is not specific to TTRPGs. And now it's time for the shoutouts. LDK-YS7RT says, no question, just say I appreciate this channel for its world building, particularly D&D world building content. Also, Displacer Kitty Tobias at 413. Great catch, LDK-YS7RT. Iron Engineer says, hey there, my dude. Hey there back. Unless you're talking to Tobias, then I guess meow. And Arget Lamb says, Arget Lamb? Arget Lam? Arget Lam. Arget Lamb. There's a few ways I could do that. Our little green gracias? Our little green gracias? Gracias? Is that a typo for Tobias? It's the same amount of characters. This is going to keep me up at night. showed up on the left at this time, and if you get that reference, you were watching Cartoon Network at the same point in history as I was. Well, now I feel like I need to know that. Why is this going to keep me up now? Now, if you were paying attention in today's video, leave a timestamp in the comments down below with where you saw our little buddy Tobias, and you just might get shouted out in the next one. Anyways, that's how I do my city structure. Let me know in the comments down below what you do to build your cities. Huge shout out to World Anvil for sponsoring this episode. Thank you so much for watching. Forge on, my friends. And remember, you want to take train A to Night Street, don't take the B train. You'll regret it.